You're listening to a 4x4 Radio Network podcast.
Hey Jeepers, welcome to another episode, action-packed and thrill-seeking of On the Trail with Kevin and Scott. I am Scott, your slapstick parts post that is on a continual mission to have Kevin help keep me awake by kicking me in the shins while we record. And with that,
I'm Kevin. I'm the engineer of the show, the technical guy, the one who reads the instructions, uses the right tools, and, usually follows those instructions unless Scott wants me to do something that the instructions don't cover, which occasionally happens.
You want a challenge.
There's truth to that. And speaking of which, we've had quite a few challenges here over the last couple of weeks, but that's in the show.
Yes, and while we will share what worked for us and as well as what didn't, hopefully this does.
Yeah.
It is always up to you to do your research, read the instructions.
And please follow them.
That's right.
They did spend a little bit of effort making them.
And the best part is that I am completely halfway falling asleep right now. The Patreons can probably see, as you called me, Rick Brand Quinkle or something like Crinkle. But yet I can power through the beginning of this show right for once.
Somewhat intelligibly.
Somewhat intelligibly.
You actually got that word out. I'm impressed.
Yeah, impressed, yes. Manageable vegetable.
So, anyway, Scott, you were going to talk about a recent occurrence with a friend of yours.
Yeah, there's a handful of stuff going on, but the first one, actually, we covered it in the one show, and kind of one of those things I would like to reiterate, because especially when you have the push button disconnects and a few other things, Kevin and I talked about when you're done wheeling, take 5 minutes out, walk around your Jeep, make sure you don't have anything hanging underneath it.
Bend over, look underneath.
Yep.
When you're reconnecting your sway bar, if you disconnected, if you don't have the automatic disconnect like some fancy people, look for anything odd.
Guilty.
Look for anything dripping.
Yes.
Look for anything out of place.
Yep.
Look for things that just don't look right or normal,
especially before you hit the highway. And the reason why I bring this up is a good friend of mine at work. I went to work the other day, and there was his Jeep on a rollback, and tow truck being unloaded. I went, "Ooh, bad day." He goes, "Yeah, man. I was driving along, and the rear end locked up and spun me around and threw me into oncoming traffic,
and happily he did not end up becoming somebody's hood ornament."
Yeah, it's been a rough week for hood ornaments. But other than that, though, one of the things that I got right to work. So he's on the phone talking to somebody, and I stick my head up underneath there, and automatically 2 seconds I knew what it was because I smelled it. I said, "Yeah, we just had a Jeep event here," and I said, "You went on the rocks, didn't you?" He goes, "Yeah."
How'd you know?
Yeah, and you came down on something pretty hard, didn't you? Yeah. And I said, "Yeah, you're out of diff fluid." What do you mean? And I come from under the Jeep. Bear in mind, as I'm telling you this, I'm asking all these questions while under the Jeep. And I bring my finger.
He's not a shop guy, so he's dressed in nice clothes for a upscale automotive parts department guru kind of guy.
And I got my head right up underneath that muddy Jeep, and I said, "Here's your problem." And I had my finger full of diff fluid. And he says, "What happened?" And I said, "You came down in a rock and bent your diff cover and leaked all your fluid out." And of course, sure enough, we get the Jeep on the lift, and it looks like his differential went 4 rounds of Mike Tyson, because there's all the Skittles inside the thing.
Oh, all the gear teeth and bearings were seized,
and not one drop of fluid.
Gee, imagine that.
Yeah, so he used 4 days of fourth fingers just doesn't work today. 4 days, I guess, driving around with no diff oil.
I'm surprised he got 4 days. I'd be surprised. To me, 400 feet.
Well, and that's the thing I asked him. I said, because he likes his tunes.
Yeah.
And I said, you drive around all 4 days with the radio on pretty loud. He goes, no, my buddy was driving. I'm like, and your buddy didn't call you and say, "Hey, something's singing back here." But again, we had a little laugh, but we started talking about upgrades and stuff like that, and I gave him some ideas to do, but that's just what happens. So take those few minutes, walk around your Jeep, look for the puddles. We make the joke, make sure to check your fluids. Yep, puddle of each.
Yeah, pretty much eat. If it stops showing a puddle, it probably means it's empty.
And I wish I could say that, but my valve cover gas is leaking. So when I don't have a drip in the driveway, that's when I know to check the oil. I'm probably 2 quarts low.
Yep. Well, and it's funny you say that. Not Jeep, but a Mazda, for a good friend of mine who has the horse barn.
Right.
He called me last weekend, and the usual, "I hate to bother you, but okay."
Just ask your question.
Ask it away. I don't understand it. The wife's Mazda 626. It's got about 130 130,000 on it.
Yeah.
It's got no oil in it. It's like, I said, oil light on? Well, no, that's what's weird. Okay, well, the good news is, these little foreign BuzzBox motors, I mean, if they get any oil, they're not going to, the light stays off so it doesn't come on, and they're somewhat operating. He didn't burn it up, fortunately.
Yeah.
He did get it all the way down to a quart of oil in the oil pan. He burned almost a gallon, 4 quarts. But he doesn't have any spots, and he doesn't see leaks. And all right, I'm out. I'll come out. So I drove out, 45-minute drive out to the farm, and he's got it on his little work platform. At least it was out of the sun. And he's like, I don't want to pull that intake off. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do. Okay, you don't want to, but I will.
Yeah. Because
I'm under there and I see oil, but it's like I don't see 4 quarts worth of leakage.
Yeah.
I said, talk to me. Smoke? Only when you start it for just a few minutes. Clue number 1. Mm-hmm. All right. Any other weird? Well, I've told you before, I've got this whistling noise. Where? Point it to me. Show me where you think you hear it. Right. Manifold leak. This has got a plastic manifold. Yep. When was, I've had it into 4 garages, and that's why I'm bothering you, is I've had 4 different garages, and, it was too expensive, or they don't do that, or this didn't do it, or I couldn't find it, or, he says, okay. Well, we did a little forensic. This is an old enough Mazda that it actually has a positive crankcase ventilation, or PCV valve, that didn't rattle.
There you
intake.
go.
In fact, big clue number 3, other than the leaks, was when I pulled the manifold off. He's like, I'm scared to take that off. Why? It's a piece of plastic. I don't know. Okay, you don't understand it. I got that. I do. We're taking it off.
Yeah.
And when I tipped it up to lift it off, because you have to tilt it, it's on a V6 and it kind of hooks over the back of it. I probably poured at least a pint of that quart of oil out of the intake manifold all over the engine. And I said, yeah, that was my biggest clue. Leaking from seals, most all seals, both crank seals were leaking. The seal around the spark plug boot, since this has the centered spark
Twin
plugs, and oil in the center valley in places it's not supposed to be, on the wrong side of the seals. Oil's getting pushed into the intake manifold, so it's burning on the startup during high vacuum. Not showing up the rest of the time, but that is because of the catalytic converter.
Right.
Once the cat gets hot, folks, it burns up even engine oil. So he'd probably smoking all the time, really bad, but the engine warms up pretty quick, which tells me to go check, why is the crankcase under positive pressure? It shouldn't be. Your positive crankcase ventilation system should put it under negative pressure.
Right.
Seals are designed for that negative pressure, not for positive. So we found the PCV valve, and I was shocked because EGR valve was in pretty sorry state too, and it's one of these big electronic nightmare things. Yeah. But we were able to clean that up. I mean, it was plugged. You looked at the end of the EGR port where it went into the manifold. There was no holes.
Yeah.
So we long story short, cleaned all that up, replaced the PCV valve, put the manifold back on, and I realized I'm jumping a little out of sequence what we talked about.
Right.
But I torqued it in accordance with the proper sequence for plastic manifolds. Now, we don't have a lot of those in the Jeep world yet, but they're coming, and there's some on the newer motors, the modular motors.
Like the 3.8 and the 3.6
have them. And folks, let me tell you something. You read the sequence about torque sequences so you don't warp cylinder heads and you don't warp aluminum intake manifolds. Plastic are worse.
Yeah.
And somebody had gotten on there, and the first clue was when I go to take the thing off. And it took 2 hands to pop the wrench to break the studs loose.
Oh.
That wasn't it. It was Joe Mechanic at one of the shops.
Yeah.
And I'm going, Earl, here, give me the phone. Torque 14 inch-pounds.
Yeah.
So long story short, we put it all back, but I torqued it in the proper sequence. And because this is not a cylinder head with a circular spiral, this one is a right to left. But somebody had gone to one end, gone to the other end, and then tightened the ones in the middle.
I paid $600 for my new battery-operated Snap-on impact wrench. I'm using it.
Exactly. So we put it all back together. The car started immediately. No blue smoke, even with the things cold. Yeah. And I would have sworn it had been. I mean, I did use a can of carb cleaner cleaning out the manifolds and stuff. And no hiss, no whistle, no nothing, and not even the intermittent stutter that he had. It was gone. I'm like, well, if you're not got a good intake system, if you don't, so
check.
And that was the key. Is he hadn't done any checking, and I said, no, you're going to check the oil on this every week for a while, aren't you? And make sure that it doesn't continue. But as soon as we did that, I cleaned off the seal spaces, and the only reason that car survived was at least he did one basic check, and that's just on a car. So your Jeep, you're going to go out and thrash it. Yeah, get under there and check it. And more on that later, where yours truly, this isn't a normal check, but we'll talk about that later on the interesting results that Scott and I discovered today.
Yeah, this show, brace yourself, folks. This show is going to be really tech heavy because I know you all like that stuff, and
had lots of requests.
And we've, even though it's been a couple of weeks since we recorded. By the way, this is show 103.
103.
Yeah, so we're 12 minutes in. We just finally said 103.
That's okay.
But
they understand.
But the idea is, again, a lot of people asked about the skit. Surprisingly enough, I didn't get roasted too bad on the emails with the body armor situation.
Yeah, so far so good.
Yeah, so I mean, but I'll just let the other people catch up.
Well, and body armor is a very personal preference.
Yeah,
and I get it. If you want the aluminum skid pans, go for it. Yeah. I kind of said that in the last show. I just said my preference is steel where the rocks are, and aluminum where it's just the trees and the bumps and the looks pretty.
Yeah.
But hey, that's the joy of a Jeep. It's kind of like Barbies for boys. You can dress them up any way you want.
Let's say G.I. Joes or action figures.
Depending on how young these are, some of them may not know who that is.
Fair enough. Yeah.
But yeah, I get you. But anyhow, so I tried to give you a reference, a non-gender specific, non-racial specific, not anything specific reference.
Come on,
don't go to sleep,
into
Scott.
The year. Come on into the year. But no, again, we can segue into this because again, it's a very on that subject, if you will. You had a little adventure.
I'm just going to go ahead and get in the garage. When you're done, you just come tell me and follow into the garage, okay?
And this is where the show ends, folks. No. When a friendship dissolves in acid. No, but
where did that one come from?
I have no idea. I am so slappy happy right now, guys and gals. It's not even funny. But hey, real quickly though, since we're on the subject of skid pans, you've had a little adventure with your Jeep, so we're just going to pretty much jump right on in to the garage if that's okay with you, Kevin.
That's okay
because we got a lot to cover.
We've been all day so far.
Yeah, not only am I on 2 hours of sleep, but we've also been in the 99-degree heat.
Yep.
Yeah, fall. It's where we don't get fall down here in Florida except when we collapse from dehydration. Mm-hmm. But no, you had a little adventure you had to fix on your TJ, which is a kind of a common problem. As I'm doing this to yours, I realize I'm going to have to do this to mine.
Correct. And what he's talking about, folks, is if you go back a little ways, and most TJs have either not developed this because, or they've already been dealt with to some degree. And this was a common problem with TJs. And I should say still is a common problem.
Yeah.
And it has to do with the check valve in the fuel tank, in the filler line. Most vehicles have some sort of a, not really, well, I guess it is part of the rollover system / overfill system. That's a flapper valve, a floating ball, a popper valve, or something that as you fill the fuel tank, it rises with the fuel level. And then once you're full, it closes off, which then forces the gas up to kick off the fuel pump. And that's perfectly good. And its real reasons there is if you roll over, it doesn't immediately start going glorp, 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 glorp out your fuel filler neck and, and turning you into, some kind of funeral pyre or. Yeah,
because your gas cap, contrary to popular belief, I mean, it really doesn't hold.
It's a vent system. It is not a fuel it's designed to hold the vapors in to go through the charcoal system. And usually if you get a rollover, you're going to pop that sucker off.
Yeah.
So what I'm going to say right now is whatever you do, if you choose to pursue one of these things that we're going to talk about, make sure you do not remove a fuel rollover control system without replacing it in kind.
Yeah.
And that's specifically what we're going to talk about here. And this was a big rage on the forums probably 6-8 years ago.
Yeah, it was a while ago.
And I did have it on mine, and that was TJ's had this weird habit that you would fill them at the gas station, and then when the fuel filler would close off, it would spit back upwards of a pint of fuel up the neck and onto your slacks, skirt, hands,
shoes.
whatever shoes.
Yeah.
Not really a great situation.
No, it's called the TJ burp.
Yeah, exactly. It's a TJ burp. And there are quite a few different versions of how to fix that burp. And it has to do with the fact that the TJ fuel overfill control ball, or found out that they also came later in models had a plunger, like mine. The plastic or the seal material was not compatible with ethanol. Swelled up and stuck.
Swelled on up.
Yeah, and normally, ... they stuck in the open position. The vast majority. And so the most commonly accepted fix was to head on over to your parts store and order, pardon me, I'm going to speak blasphemy, and order a Chevy fill pipe.
You had me worried. I thought you were going to say FJ Cruiser.
No. And then do a little surgery on this Chevy fuel pipe. Their flapper door fits inside the hose. So you would excise the Chevy flapper door, and then take your fuel filler neck pipe, the rubber piece from the steel top that was where you actually stick the nozzle in. Right. And it goes down in kind of a little bit of a J curve into your tank, which has got a plastic filler neck because it's a plastic tank. And it's the same diameter as the GM. So you heat it up good and hot in boiling water, and it softens it enough. And then you put a little grease on the plug, and you make sure the flapper's facing the right way, and you use any dowel, hammer handle, screwdriver handle, anything big enough to push that sucker down. And I can remember you guys all coming over. We just met back then. I don't know if you were there, but I know Ron was there laughing and Brian was there giggling as I'm struggling to shove this check valve down. And the whole idea is it should be hard. It shouldn't move. Once it's in there, you want the cooling pipe to really grab it.
Yeah, it's like the car cells. When they're gone, they're gone. When it's in, it's in.
And the idea is that performs the same responsibility. It lets the fuel flow freely downhill, but the flapper closes and will not let fuel come backwards in any great quantity.
Yeah, we like to call that, well, it's not really an official name. We call it the Gandalf valve in the automotive industry. You shall not pass.
Oh, yeah, but it doesn't usually stomp a staff on a rock and make the tunnel collapse.
Oh, you can stab a screwdriver down the hole to get it to work.
Yeah. Well,
what we got?
And here's my story that developed recently.
Yeah.
Mine has the later little plunger. I'm playing with it here, and the Patreons can see it now. And the little plunger is, I don't know, looks like a golf tee with a...
looks like a sombrero.
Sombrero on top. It's a good way to put it.
Yeah. Or a bowler hat.
And then there's a little spring that goes on the T portion, and it sits down in a plastic white cup with big windows cut out.
It almost looks like an extended socket, like a deep well socket.
Yeah. And the idea is the spring keeps the plunger pushed up against the gas filler neck without being too tight, so that the gas can push it down and let the gas flow into the tank through a couple of openings. The problem is mine stays down when you push it down. The spring can't push it back. You can even tap it on the table upside down.
It don't move.
And it don't move. You got to push. Well,
with some force, actually.
If you fill your tank completely full, like I did one time, and I had no idea, that you can slosh enough gasoline that it will hit the bottom of that and push it up. And it pushed it all the way up tight, like a full tank of gas during a rollover.
Yeah.
And it sticks just as well up as it does down. And and if you look at that, Scott, it's going to be a little difficult to get fuel through that. There's a couple of little remaining openings. Yeah, about a teaspoon an hour. So I could not fill my TJ's gas tank any quicker than you'd run it, it'd fill the fuel pipe, and it'd click off. And you'd have to go, what the heck's going on? And it would drain down enough to let you do it again. So you're sitting there going, blurp, click, blurp, click. And after about 10 minutes of that, you have about 4 gallons in your tank, which is enough to drive home disgustedly and go, what in the name of God's green earth? And I took some pictures of, I saw the little float that was sticking up at the top, and I took a plunger, a long rod, and went, can I push that down? This is after pulling the fuel filler off the body and the hose off and all that stuff, and pushed it right down the hole, and it worked okay one time, and guess what it did?
Got stuck again.
Boink, back up to the top.
Yep.
Now, I'm sure if I'd fought with it, taking it apart every time I filled it up and pushed it down and then let it slide up, eventually it'd wear itself to the point that maybe it would start working again.
Yeah.
But remember, folks, I had already replaced this function with a correct function. So Scott kindly came over today and helped me drop the TJ tank. And I'll give you the quick and dirty. It wasn't that bad. Yes, it took treating the bolts. I did manage to get all 7 tank support bolts off without breaking a one. That in itself, I told him, I said, and one breaks, we're stopping, holding it back up. I'll do this later.
Yeah.
They all came down with that threat.
That in itself is a victory.
It is. Got the fuel filler neck off. Of course, it's been off a dozen times in the last couple of months, so that's not a big deal. And then hooked up my transmission jack, which is just a little flat Harbor Freighty, half-inch ratchet drive.
It's a handy little thing, man.
Yeah, a little flat jack that, and took the weight of the tank, and we started lowering it down gently and began to see quite a bit of Jeeping with Judd, Jasper, Georgia,
private property.
Yeah, in places that, I didn't know it could settle there. Somewhere up there is my rollover valve, my fill assembly, my pump, my fuel level sender connection.
It was about an inch deep.
Let's go for the archaeological dig. And I had to dig with it just down far enough that, the lines weren't pulling too hard.
Yeah.
Then we, used the little push connectors, and I got both the vent line on the one side, the fuel pressure line on the other side to release properly and slide off. Did take about, 10 minutes of tap, tap, blow, wind, scrape, tap, tap, tap to get the electrical connector to finally unlock. And
using
then finally,
the proper screwdriver as a hammer.
Well, just as a tapper.
I know.
I was trying to knock. The problem is, people, this is one of those Chrysler red slide lock systems, and you can get them free with patience,
air and
tapping and breaking up the crud, not tapping as in cracking the plastic, just the kind of like this. Let's see. Yeah, like that. Just gentle. Sorry about the static. We've got a cable going out here again. And
my earballs.
Finally, we got it to come down and lowered the tank out. Got it out. It took me longer to clean the driveway off after we rinsed the tank. And then
it was the funniest thing because as you're spraying the top of it off, it ain't draining out of the bottom of the tank. And then so he started spraying the sides, and just mud's coming out of it. And
for those that don't know, TJ tanks aren't strapped up; they're strapped down. You strap the tank into that gas tank skid pan. So you strap it down into the skid pan, then you bolt the skid pan to the bottom of the Jeep.
Right.
So there are drain holes in it. And mine were open from looking at it underneath. What I didn't see was the hermetic seal all the way around the tank of solid mud.
Yeah.
And we actually, when we pulled the tank out, Scott, you can do the sound effects of we pulling that tank,
Exactly.
And then I got to look at what was going on inside my skid pan.
Kevin doesn't have very many, what's the proper word to say? Arch nemesis? But rust. Kevin hates rust with a passion,
I kill it.
And
kill it.
Yeah, kind of like me with spiders. But no.
Yeah.
The thing is that when we pull that gas tank up, it was all muddy.
Yeah.
So as we're rinsing the mud up, and then the orange comes from underneath, and it wasn't orange like, oh, look, little small surface
No, it was
rust.
big carbuncles.
It was big carbuncles. It looked like a gnarly looking, oh my goodness, like the pumpkin or whatever they're called, like the... Oh my goodness! Right now, especially in Halloween time, you go any farmer's market, they got the gourds that have all the growths on them or whatever. It looked just like that, and I'm like, Kevin not going to be happy.
Well, Kevin just kind of did a big sigh and grabbed the 4-inch grinder with a flap wheel and attacked the inside, going, okay, can I see daylight through?
Because of the situation, people say take 6 feet back. I was staying 12 feet back because I didn't want to get tetanus from the air.
No, it was flying.
Oh, gosh.
But did manage to clean all the rust out. Yeah, there was some pitting. Yeah, I could have pad welded a few holes, but structurally it was still okay.
Yeah.
Then we did a rust kill, primer, Rust-Oleum, and then bed lining on top of it to get us back. And amazing how much lighter that assembly was.
That's the craziest thing. It was all the rust.
But I'm not exaggerating when I tell you that as I was trying to rinse the driveway down, I had a wall of mud, probably 10 feet wide and 3 inches thick that came out off, under, or in between that tank.
It would not push out of the way. And the interesting thing is while we're doing all this stuff, is that, you kind of think about, like, again, with the rust and situations like that, but we had that conversation about body armor.
Yep.
And, of course, there's this big, gnarly dent that made my backbone hurt for a second.
Scott was in the back of my Jeep with another person riding shotgun, and we came off an obstacle that I misjudged and landed on that skid plate and put about a 3-inch long, 3/4 inch high divot.
Oh, yeah. And he's sitting there trying to hammer that thing back. He goes, at least it's flat and smooth now. I'm like, okay. But that's when we talk about steel skids.
Yeah.
The factory steel skids on a TJ gas tank,
they're impressive.
They're impressively stout.
But long story short, what you do then is once I got it to where I wouldn't be letting the remnants of the Sahara Desert into my fuel system, and that took a lot of cleaning around the lock rings for the pump and the sensor system, and picking out rocks and rinsing it again, and then washing. And I still had a bunch of crud when it came off that was around the gasket. Yeah. And then you do something that I will admit, makes most people's blood run cold. You kind of have to trust the fact that, for gasoline to burn, there's something called the lower explosive limit and the upper explosive limit. The lower is, if you're too low, you don't have enough gasoline in the air. If you're above the upper, you have don't have enough air in the gasoline. Yeah. And so you're really hoping that the tank is in that upper explosive limit because you stick your arm into the pump hole. Mind you, this tank is not empty. Because even though it said empty, and the gas light was on, there's probably 5+ gallons of fuel in there. I have a new respect for the reserve on my TJ.
Well, and that's the thing, like everyone keeps saying, like, Scott, what do you do? And I said, well, the first thing I want to do when I get a new car is I see what the fuel capacity is. Like on the Gladiator, it's 23 gallons approximate. I mean, don't hold me on that.
Run it to the light?
I run it to the light, and then I slam it full. Okay, not, brim it, but I do the one click. And then I go, okay, how many gallons I put in? Okay, I put in 17 gallons. Yeah. I do it again, 17 gallons. Okay, at that point, I'm safe to say when the fuel light comes on, I have 3 gallons, because even though it says 23, I'll go 17, 18, 19, 20. I have 3 gallons in reserve.
And so many miles per gallon on average.
Exactly.
Other than the slosh factor of, you get down that last gallon, you may not be able to pick it up.
And what most people don't know is like the 91 YJ that I had was a 20-gallon tank. Yep. It just had an extended filler neck, so it was a 15-gallon tank.
Right.
Almost as far as I know, every research I've done, every TJ tank's a 20-gallon. Everyone's, no, I got a 15-gallon. I can't get more than 15 gallons in it.
Well, you got 5 gallons of reserve, folks.
Well, you got approximately, not every kind, because you mentioned the board about headroom.
Yeah, there's headspace. You got to take, there needs to be air above that fuel for expansion and contraction. Yeah. But long story short, as you reach your hand in through there, back over towards the filler neck. Now, some series, I don't personally have experience with those, but I've read other people's accounts. The check is a ball, a white plastic ball that sits in a little tubular bird cage below the filler neck, and you have to kind of reach in there with side cutters and go nip, 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 and then pop it out. Mine was a snap-in cage. Yeah. And I literally reached in there. I'm feeling it. I was like, that doesn't feel like a bird cage. And I could feel the little retaining clips. There's 4 of them. And I just went, I wonder if that'll pop right off. And pulled it out and said, okay, that job's done. Now let's put this whole thing back together before the garage goes up in a big pyroclastic explosion. Yeah.
And again, Kevin, I reiterate 1,000 times, is he replaced his valve with another one.
Yes, and I can't stress that enough, folks. If you're going to remove the factory filler neck check valve, do not do it without putting a equal or better system in its place. Yeah. Replacement tanks have better versions of this. Or you can do the trick. You can look it up. There's 1,000 videos and write-ups on the Chevy part that will fit in the fuel neck filler line that will do the same thing. You do not want to be on a trail, turn topsy-turvy, and hear that bloop, 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 as gallons of gas pour down behind you, and you're sitting there going, I'm stuck.
Yeah, that's not the time you want to be panicking and realize. Yeah,
please do not. But you can look. There's a lot of stuff out there, but it was kind of interesting. So now I feel perfectly safe, and no, we haven't been out to the gas station yet, but I should be able to fill the TJ full and be able and then do it another time right after it without having to stick a freaking rod down, take the filler neck out and poke this little crazy valve down.
Hold on. I got to stab my Jeep in the neck.
Yes.
What? Nothing. Hold
Nothing.
on. Sir, why do you have a long screwdriver? Shh.
Now, on the other hand, I will laugh hysterically because we were the amount of dirt. I just can't stress enough the amount of dirt, gravel, rocks. I mean, serious gravel that came out of my gas tank area. It was
there was so much that his neighbor started panning for gold in his driveway.
Close.
I'm Prospector 249er. I'm trying to find me some gold dust.
I didn't know you could put that much garbage in there, and it does have drain holes.
Yeah.
It just...
especially now.
Yeah, well, now they actually can drain. I did check the bottom of the tank for wear to make sure it didn't have any damage from the impact of the guard. No. Fortunately, it's a very strong, I think it's a polypropylene or polyethylene tank.
The weakest part on those tanks is the seam where they're welded,
where they're heat welded together.
Those seams split, and especially after a rear end accident. And a lot of times you'll never know. That's what happened with my YJ. And it's like, all of a sudden,
start smelling gas.
I start smelling gas when I fill it up. I'm like, man, why does it smell like gas? And then I would never see leaks on the ground because it was evaporating.
Right.
It was a small little crack. But then I kind of realized, okay, looking at the history, even though the Carfax was clean, the back had been repainted. And then I'm like, okay, someone got in a little bit of a love tap. And I bought the last YJ tank in the country back in 1998.
Huh. But what's the story for you guys that are listening to this? You guys and gals, is don't be afraid. If you need to drop the tank, you will need some tools. The biggest one you'll need is a set of the little slide-on collars for taking gas lines apart. Yeah. Okay. I was laughing. I have the expensive little metal scissor ones that I don't think I've ever got them to open a thing. What works for me is that cheap little blister pack of multicolored plastics that are hanging on every parts store shelf. And you know what? They're starting to wear out because they actually have worked really well. And just a matter of fussing at arm's length under and finally getting the one thing slid on and pop, there it came off. Fuel line's off. Okay. And then same sort of thing. Now, the vent line, I didn't have one quite the right size for the vent line, but the vent line connectors are open and exposed because that's not a pressure system. So I was able to take 2 picks that you get, for picking hoses and that stuff and hold the tabs back in it and pop right off also. The electrical connector is a standard 4-wire Mopar style slide lock connector. You got 100 of them under the dash and under the hood and all those places. It is going to be completely seized with dirt. Just expect it. Yep. And all I did was play tattoo on it with a light tapping of a screwdriver. And as you did that, you could just see the sand and dirt sifting out. Blow it off, do it again, blow it. And then eventually, after about 5 minutes, yes, you can get frustrated, but eventually 5, you try and move the red slide, it doesn't move. Then you try again, and it does. Okay, great. Now let's go back and tap around the little push button part of it. And eventually, let's try, pop. The connector came off clean, nothing broken, went back on clean. I did add some silicone grease, dielectric grease, whatever, not to the electrical connectors, but to the seal area on all of these connectors as they went back together. The gas can came down, our gas tank came down without too much trouble. We did use penetrating lube on the bolts, but I've been after them before. So, when I'm under there, I know where they are. There's 4 on the back that have like a little lock tray. They're speed nut bolts that sit in a little tray that keeps them from turning, that take to the 4 right under your bumper in the back. And then there's 3 on the front of the tank up. You'll find if you jack the Jeep up a little bit and let the rear axle droop, it doesn't have to droop a long ways,
Yeah, it's like, I think, a couple inches.
A couple of inches was it. Just so that if you were looking from the diff, if you're looking at the diff, you can see it below the gas tank. That gives you a little more room to get up there with an extension and actually get those bolts out and to, quite frankly, drop the tank down. Yeah. I didn't even take the wheels off. We just let them hang, and they were touching the ground, so it was supported. But the jack stands, the wheel chocks were chocked and all that kind of stuff on the front end. It took us about an hour and a half of fussing with the mud and the mire to get it out, to get it cleaned, and then discover the rust.
Yeah, I think we were pretty much done. We started at like 9. We were done by 2, and that was with a lunch break and all that, too.
Yeah, with going out to lunch and then reassembling.
Yeah.
And the closing hint on that one for anybody who is going to attempt this is do not stick your key in the ignition and expect it to work perfectly when you first turn the key on. Don't even crank because you've opened the fuel line. It's a high-pressure fuel line. You've got air in it. What you do with any Jeep, and it's in the service manual, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, is turn the key to on, count to 3, slowly, 3 seconds. That's the run time for the pump in pre-start.
Right.
So you'll click it on, and if you're listening, you'll actually hear, turn it off, turn it back to on. And you do that 3 times,
Yep.
and you will pressurize the rail. Even though it'll still have an air bubble in it, you'll bring the rail back up to 60 PSI, and the check valve will hold that. So that bubble will be compressed. Then you go ahead and crank. And mine fired right off. Mm-hmm. And after about 30 seconds, we let it idle. Like, yeah, here it is. And then it came right back. That was the air bubble burping through.
Chopped up the air bubble.
Chopped up the air bubble. Gave it to all 6 injectors and went back to running again.
Exactly.
So now I'm going to go down and fill the tank, probably sometime tomorrow or Sunday when I get a chance to actually drive my Jeep. So thanks to Scott, I can drive my Jeep.
Yay. Well, that's, let's say the cool thing that we did. You want to take a quick little break?
Yeah, and then we'll get back to the other fun that I've been having over the past 3 weeks.
Exactly. We've been busy little parts people and Jeep people these past 3 weeks. So with that, we're going to be right back in one quick moment. Hey, Jeeples, how you doing today? This is Scott, one your favorite On the Trail podcast. Just to remind you, as always, to check out our Patreon page, our YouTube page, the 4x4 Radio Network. And again, thank you to all of our corporate sponsors. We really appreciate
all of our Patreons.
Everything you do and everything, exactly, because being a Patreon has perks. Some stuff going on to them soon. So with that, we're going to get back to the show, back to the action, and back to Scott's bad dad jokes. Hi, Kevin.
Bad dad.
Well, I'm a dog dad, so most of my jokes are not furry. Wait.
Yeah.
That joke was bad.
Yes, it was.
Oh, Gunner's going to bite me for that one.
Probably. No, he'll just lick you when you get home in the face because you've been gone all day working on somebody else's Jeep.
The thing is he is such a cat because when we try to leave, he wants his butt scratching. So just like a cat, you scratch a little back area and he just arches his back up and just starts going, like licking his lips.
Yeah.
You just give him little scritches and he just loves it. I'm like, man, were you a cat?
Yeah, well, he did hang around with cats for years.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, let's move on to some of the other interesting projects. Which one should I talk about first?
Well, I think we should shift
Driving
gears.
Miss Daisy, or
Well, let's shift gears to Mark Lawson's friend, and then we can go over to.
So that's literally shifting gears.
The Cupcake Crew.
Okay.
Cupcake Factory. Sorry.
Well, the other thing he's referring to is a good friend of the show, Mark Lawson, who owns Jeep Lab here in Tampa. His stepdad has a friend that they go wheeling with, and during one of the wheeling trips, the friend who has, I believe it's a TJ also, with a V8 conversion.
Yeah.
But it retains the factory AX15 transmission.
Yes.
And a little over just little heavy right foot in the wrong situation resulted in his
a French dictator, Napoleon Bonaparte. His transmission.
Yeah, he well, we didn't know at the time. We had to go do some forensics, but we ended up rebuilding an AX15, and it was okay. He bought a junkyard one, or a friend had a damaged one, or whatever one, and he bought that for $75. He had his and a master rebuild kit, and he got a really good one. I wish I knew where he got that really, really good one.
Yeah,
it was one of the better ones I've ever handled as far as having every part we needed.
Yes,
and we took two and made one. Okay, actually 2 in a kit. And it was a long day. It's AX15s are not for the faint of heart. Okay. They do have some really neat things. Turns out I learned something new, Scott, too.
What's that?
As much as the world runs around and says, "Oh, AX15s, they're almost gone. You can't find them. They're hard to find." And I will admit, if you're looking for a Jeep AX15 and don't have one at all, they're hard to find. But they're actually the same transmission internally as the Toyota. I believe it's R120.
Okay.
The 5-speed in the pickups and Toyota 4Runners, particularly in the 70-80 series, 70s and 80s. And the cases are a little different in terms of the forecase and the rear case. But the way the AX15 is made, folks, and this is kind of the neat part, the center plate and all the rails, gears, and shifts are the same.
Wow.
Now, you may have to do a different first motion. I haven't confirmed, but the one I looked at, the first motion shaft, which is the one that sticks into the clutch and the pilot bearing, looks identical. Now, I don't know with the metric versus the U.S.
Right.
But so there's a potential for a whole lot of parts for AX15s out there sitting in the junkyards and in earlier years Toyota trucks.
Yeah, I actually thought about converting my NSG 370 to a AX15.
Well, folks, what's neat about the AX15 is most transmissions, the gears are basically mounted either in the rear case or in the front case, and the other end just kind of closes the clamshell.
Right.
The AX15 doesn't do that. The AX15 carries the load on a center plate about an inch thick. And if you look at it and you've got it in there, you'll see it. You'll see a front aluminum case and a rear aluminum case sandwiching this inch thick plate. And it's got a bunch of fittings on it. Those are for the check balls that make sure that you only get in one gear at a time,
right,
and springs and all that kind of stuff. So you actually can take the shift tower off, and that's 4 bolts, and then one slider that comes out through the back of the transmission. Again, not hard. And then slide the front half of the case off, take the bolts, slide the rear half. We made a little stand that you put 2 bolts in the bottom holes of that plate, and mount it to a little wooden frame, like a little H.
That was ingenious, man.
And it holds the transmission up in its normal position, but naked, with all the gears. And at that point you go, okay, let's start looking. Yeah. Broken, worn out, worn, broken, worn. Abuse, kind of a situation. And I shouldn't say that because Ron's was broken worse than Brian's. Brian really, most of his trauma was the first motion shaft. There was some trauma on the rear case. It wasn't bad, but the donor tranny that he had for parts was in better shape. Right. So we cataloged and disassembled the entire system. I won't go into great detail on that because there's lots of videos out there, but I will tell you point blank, don't try it without the service manual. The service manual's available online. I'll even go so far, I have the PDF from Mopar for the AX15 for a complete overhaul. I will share it if requested. And I know, Scott, that usually means I'm going to get a lot of emails, or you're going to be sending me a whole lot of emails going, can you send me that file?
Got another one.
And that's fine. It's a scary document at first, the first time you read through it, because it kind of, but in light of doing it, it's literally a step by step. Take these bolts out, remove this, pull this pin. It even covers how to pull and reinstall the balls, pills, and pins of the shift linkage interlock. And that will drive you nuts. Scott was there for a little of that going, okay, where's this spring? Where'd that ball go? Where's the pill? And everybody's looking at me going, what's the pill? And I had to show him, okay, this thing that looks like a grainer knife is a pin. That goes inside each of the lock shafts, and that's just a pusher that goes from one to the other. The pills look like pills. Or Mike Ike's or solid steel pills. And then the balls, well, they're the same size as the pills, but they're round rather than oblong. And there's a sequence. You put them together in the shift rails, And it's not difficult if you follow the manual. It tells you exactly which one goes where and how, and you pack things with grease so they stay in place. And that was hunky-dory. We did fight with a few things. Okay, a few components were supposed to be slip-fit.
Yeah.
They didn't exactly want to slip anymore because they'd been hammered a little bit. We got them apart. And my biggest challenge was the shift dogs in the synchro system, and they were fighting me. We finally got them all in. Long story short, we rebuilt the transmission. It took about a solid, 8 to 10 hours to do it complete from top to bottom. And that includes some time with the micrometers to make sure that the shaft wear and plate wears and free plays were correct, some feeler gauges. But that was one of those more interesting one where I promptly was offered a job in my own bay if I wanted to start doing transmissions. And I was like, no, not happening here, folks.
Nope, not at all.
But I will tell you, if you're fairly good with a wrench, you know how to use both a F mic, a C mic, and a feeler gauge, and know what they mean, and how to use them, you can rebuild an AX15. I wouldn't try and do it in one day. It's better if you do the teardown. Take a deep breath, go take a nap, sleep, wake up the next day.
Take good notes,
and put it all back together, following the book. You can bring it back to brand new status. So, and that's a good thing. Now, I told him, I said, I'll give you a 15-15 warranty on it. He's like, what's that, 15 minutes or 15 feet outside the door? Because I know what engine you're putting on the front of this. There we go. Hey. All right, folks, sorry about that little blurb, but I forgot to change the battery during the commercial. I should have done that. That's what we're supposed to do, and you didn't let me do it. You must have been asleep on your job.
We'll sleep on a lot of stuff. No, one of the things, too, we talked about when we were taking the transmission apart is I asked Brian, I said, hey, what kind of fluid are you going to put back in this? Mm-hmm. And especially because I had my AX5, which is sister transmission to the AX15. And he goes, I brought the 8090 gear oil. I'm like, GL5 or GL4? Well, no, GL5. That's what the book says. I'm like, oh, okay. Okay.
No, we're going to go into this.
I should take this back because...
No, you're fine. This is real. This is what you did, and you pulled up a TSB.
Well, not really here's back when it is. When I did my second transmission, my first transmission, I ordered the Mopar fluid, and I got AX15, AX5 fluid from Mopar. Mm-hmm. And I went ahead and I put it in, ran it, beat it up, and I got 80,000 miles. Because again, 80,000 miles out of an AX5 transmission, beating up with 31 tires. Yeah, it's impressive. So, and again, I'm rough on stuff. So when I rebuilt the transmission again, I ordered the same part number, and I got a quart of 10W30 motor oil.
Right.
Like, what? Oh, no, this is what you're supposed to use now. I'm like, oh, okay, whatever. So I did my research, and I ran the part number through the catalog because I sold Mopar parts at the time. Mm-hmm. And sure enough, the Mopar AX5, AX15 fluid does change over to 10W30. And the reason
10W30
being...
motor oil
is because the GL5 fluid... The sulfur or whatever the detergents in it are a little too aggressive for the brass synchros.
Right.
And I'm like, okay. So, of course, I use the 10W30, and I put a little bit of Lucas in it because, to thicken the mix. Mm-hmm. But everyone's like, oh, no, you don't need to do that. You'll seize the motor. And it's funny because when you look at the forums back then, it was always a buddy's uncle or a friend or somebody else had a transmission locked solid up because he did that.
Yeah, no first-hand information.
Yeah, and I'm like, okay, well, quick question. Honda uses 30-weight motor oil in their transmissions and their manuals. Ford uses ATF in their manual transmissions. Okay, you know what? I'm going with what the manufacturer recommend. And AX5 is an Asian transmission, and in some ASIN or whatever. And so I'm like, all right, so it said 1030. I put 1030 in it,
and that's perfectly fine. But let's talk a little bit, as I did when I was talking to him about the transmission. And I'm going to link in transfer cases because you see a lot more of this in the NP transfer cases. And the lubricants and how they fit into the different systems. First off, the transition from gear oil into motor oils into even lighter weight transmission fluid, automatic transmission fluid, and that stuff. Part of that was driven, unfortunately, not because of wear characteristics, but because of the mileage requirements. Yeah. Heavy gear oil drags down the engine, takes power, and that chops into fuel economy, and as manufacturers continue to being pushed higher and higher and higher for fleet mileage, they continue to go to lighter and lighter lubricants, which draw less power. And because now, of course, they can manufacture things to tighter tolerances, because oil, grease, gear lube, all of that is about keeping a film of a lubricant between two pieces of metal. And the smaller the gap, the thinner the fluid can be and still support it, okay? Whereas the bigger gap, you need something thicker to keep it filled up. Otherwise, it leaks out real quick, okay?
Yeah.
And one of the big things is in an engine, you're under a pressurized oil system, all right?
Right.
In a transmission, you're not. Now, why does that play into a transfer case? Because what have we seen in the transfer cases? The original, let's use the NP231. What did it originally come with? 75-90 gear lube.
Right.
Then you saw a while that, oh, no. Okay, we're going to use motor oil. No. Now let's go to transmission fluid. Okay. And I know mine requires automatic transmission fluid. Everybody says, well, that's because it's bolted to an automatic transmission. And the fluids, no, it's not.
No.
It doesn't go between the two of them. However, in the case, there were changes over the year, and that's what people miss. And if you've done a rebuild on one or a
slip yoke eliminator.
Slip yoke eliminator kit. Yes, yeah. Thank you. And well, it's not so much in the SYE, but in the rebuild kits. What you'll find is instructions that tell you, oh, well, take the center shaft. If yours has a needle cage bearing, tap that out and replace it with the provided sleeve bearing. All right. Well, why do they do that? Well, because needle bearings, cage needle bearings don't really work as well in motor oil unless they're submerged in it or in a pressure system. Right. But they're very strong bearing. Okay, that's why they were used in the old ones. It was, they built them to go behind anything.
Yeah.
And they also knew they were going to be running in 75-90 gear. The rebuild kits all assume that you're going to be doing it into the more modern, and you're going to be using the lighter weight oils. So you're going to go to a sleeve bearing, which has a broader surface area and can be lubricated effectively with its smaller gap by a lighter weight oil. Well, the AX15 in question that we were rebuilding doesn't have a single sleeve. No, I take it back. The fifth gear was a sleeve bearing. Everything else was needle cage. The rebuild kit came with full needle cage replacements, and as well as all new synchros, roller bearings, ball bearings, and these were not fine ball bearings. These were, the ball bearings and the rollers were probably anywhere from about 3/8 of an inch in diameter, 5/16. So they're massive.
Yeah.
And the AX15 does not have a lube pump. Okay, it relies on the gears that sit at the bottom of the case to pick it up and sling that lube. Now, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that thin stuff doesn't sling around as well as thicker stuff. You think of cold honey, you can grab that stuff and throw it like a baseball.
Here, Timmy, catch. No.
Pretty much. So part of the reason, obviously, was the fuel economy. The second thing came with, as Scott mentioned it, the first incarnations of GL5 did include detergent systems in there and pressure agents that were somewhat acidic.
Yeah.
And
how to turn your Singers into disco glitter in one easy step.
And that's exactly what happened. It would eat up the yellow metals is the term they would use. The coppers, bronzes, brass alloys, all of those, and it would just absolutely break them down in short order. And again, without going into great detail on a synchro sleeve, its interface is shaped like rough. It's concentric rings that grab onto a cone on the gear to spin it up to speed. Right. And so it's fairly fine shape. It's not big, thick chunks of flat brass. It's some really small stuff. And it eat through those like nothing. And then the synchro teeth themselves, the parts that the slider goes over to engage the gears, they just crumble away, Well, nowadays you can get brass friendly, or they call it yellow metal friendly GL5.
At least not without ease.
Yes, and one brand that we both have experience with is Royal Purple.
Yeah.
And that is synchro friendly. Now, what's the bad side of using 7590? You're going to have more drag. You're going to lose a little horsepower into the transmission because the heavier lube. However, this guy, Brian, is putting it behind a V8.
Yeah.
He is putting a lot of pressure on these gears.
Yeah.
The cushioning of that heavier gear lube, the fact that his is still predominantly ball, roller, and needle bearing supported means it will behave and support, live better with the thicker gear lube. If you have one of the more modern ones, it's all sleeve bearings, whether it's a transmission transfer case, then by all means, stay away from that stuff. But the service manual for his model of AX15 clearly said 7590 GL4 or GL5 yellow metal friendly.
Yeah.
So here's the thing that you just kind of have to know your gear. If you don't know your gear, absolutely stick with the owner's manual. Don't play games with it. Follow what it says, and it'll last a lot longer.
Well, and that's one of the things in the parts business is, when we had Dextron, 2, Dextron 3 came out.
And you couldn't buy Dextron 2.
And then, then Dextron 4 came out, Dextron 5 was synthetic, but, DOT 1, then DOT 2, then DOT 3. You can go up, but you can't go backwards. If you have a DOT 5 vehicle, you can't go to DOT 3.
No, and if you actually have a DOT 3 vehicle and put 5 in it, you have to flush it.
Yeah.
Because the two will not work happily together. One is petrol-based, the other's silicon-based. Yeah. And they do not play well together.
They do not. So, again, I understand when they say, it's GL5. The book says to use GL5. And being partial, I was a hybrid. I was part old school and part new school when I did my parts. I learned on a paper catalog.
Yep.
Not so much computer stuff. I had a bunch of, guys just like you, Kevin, who, rolled up their sleeves and didn't let the computer do all the work, actual techs. Mm-hmm. So I got that, and sometimes the old school guys would be like, nah, GL4 is there for a reason. Let's not just trust the new stuff yet. In some cases, it's good.
Yeah.
But, so I always kind of worry when people go, it's all the same.
It's not all the same, folks. And if you don't know what you're playing with, you can destroy things in short order.
Perfect examples is, in 1996, I had a coworker. Well, this was 97 when this happened. He bought a brand new Ford truck with a Triton V8, and oil cap said 5W20. He goes, I ain't putting that in there. He said a lot of choice words because he was a redneck engineer. I know Kevin hates hearing that word. And he proceeded his first oil change to dump Kendall Racing 2050 because,
it's better.
It's more gooder, and I beat my truck. And he came to work and he was buying 5W20. No, it was clacking. It wasn't ticking. It was clacking.
Yeah.
And he's like, I don't know what it's doing. I said, because you didn't put the correct oil in it.
Yeah.
Now, am I old school? Yes. You're talking to a guy that put 140 weight gear oil in his AX5 to try and get him home one day. Yeah. It made it.
Yeah.
But it was clacking pretty good. But again, I understand the idea. Even on my Jeep, I'm running 10W40.
Yeah.
Because it's higher mileage.
And there's nothing wrong with doing it because but knowing what you're doing and knowing what your risks are. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you do need to creep up a little, okay? And there's a lot of articles on Dr. Google that you can find about adjustments in your oil weight. And if you look carefully, you'll actually see it in the back of your owner's manual. There's a whole section in there that talks about wear and age and temperature and different grades of oils that can be adjusted. And you know what? If you stay within those bands, if you're particularly like you got a Warren and it's starting to maybe use a little oil. Now, not much is going to fix a seal leak, but using a little oil, etc. Just don't go any thicker than what it says for running the thing in Sahara, the desert. Seriously, they kind of give you a
little leeway.
And you are working with clearances here, and that's what people don't seem to gather is lubricant values are based on the clearance in the engine, and it's the whole engine wherever that oil is being pumped. So my daughter's Honda is a turbo. The turbo has tight clearances, okay? I run a 020 in that. The manufacturer says 020. They do not give you leeway off that 020 because, all right, to make that oil work in the turbo was easy. But to make that work in the valve, they had to tighten up the bearing tolerances. So the gap between the camshaft and its bearings is much tighter now than you would have found in a comparable earlier engine.
Yeah.
The connecting rod to crankshaft, the main bearings on the crankshaft are all tightened up. The in play is less so that thin oil doesn't run out. Thin oil works really great as lubricant. It has very low viscosity. It's easy to shear and smooth to turn, but it just won't stay put unless you fence it in. And if you think of clearances as fence and oil as cattle, you put a low fence and they walk right over it.
Well, it's funny you talk about that because on my Charger 2012, again, I thought the same engine.
Yeah.
And it took 5W30.
Yeah.
5W30 motor oil, and I'm like, okay, and I beat it.
It probably was the same castings, but the bearing shells and the clearances and the end plays were more loose.
I had the answer for this. On the JK, we had the 3.8. It said to use 5W20. I put 530 in it.
Yep.
And here's the reason why I did that. One, I read a lot of knowing what you have. Now, the 3.8 motor is an older motor. It's a push rod motor.
Right.
There is no variable valve cam timing on it. Mm-hmm. And the reason why the Gladiator now calls with 0W20 is that even though the Charger had the 5W30 in a VVT motor, I now have a double variable valve timing in the Gladiator, so it gets a little more punch, a little more power, but that oil has to pass through those cam time phasers.
Yep.
And
it's not just a lubricant anymore.
It's now a
hydraulic fluid.
Yeah.
It's the hydraulic fluid for the phasers.
Right.
And anybody who's owned a tractor understands the fact that your gear case holds 10 or more gallons. Yes, I am saying that correct, folks. Gallons of transmission/hydraulic oil. And it's the same oil that's pumped out to the rams on the bucket and to lift the mower on the back. It's the same thing your transmission gears are flowing in. And so now you've got an oil that has to have both the characteristics of easy pumpability, high pressure, take extreme high pressures. By the way, it's got to keep gears from grinding together that were cast, with the concept of the 1930s. So, lubrication is one of those that if you don't really know what you're playing with, stick with the manufacturer. I'm sorry.
That's why I use the NSG 370 oil in my transmission, because I don't want, you can use synchro mesh. You probably can, but, I beat on things, and so I squirted a little Lucas in it and made it quieter.
And I'll say to that is the manufacturer's recommendations. It doesn't have to be the oil from Mopar, from Jeep, from, whoever. Yeah. They give you usually an ASTM certification or what's the other one? I'm having a senior moment here, but the different oil API. Thank you. The American Petroleum Institute. I should have remembered that. But,
man, I'm the one asleep here.
But as long as it's certified and carries the proper stamp, you should be okay. Now, I'll be honest with you. Bubba Lou's oil on the bottom shelf at your local, grocery store that has kind of almost nearly looks like the seal from API. You might want to. I tend to go, I tend to doubt, and my Jeep keeps running.
Hey, Cletus, it says AP1.
Yeah, exactly.
Can we run great value oil?
Yeah. So.
Yeah, you know what? I say that, but SuperTech had its place.
It did. It did. I know a lot of people that go, well, the engine's leaking oil faster than I can. I can't make it to the next oil change.
That 150K on the Charger, that's what the Charger got. It got SuperTech.
But anyway, moving on. That was kind of a fun one there. But the corollary to that was looking at the use of the transmission and knowing that it's going to be under intense load, even in this lightest sense, wanting to give him as much opportunity. The oil does provide some cushioning between the gears. He obviously had already had an occurrence there where he had overloaded the first motion shaft coming in from the engine and had sheared off about 4 or 5 teeth. Fortunately, the teeth just dropped down in and didn't get intermeshed in the other stuff and cause vicious shredding. Yeah. And a story of an old transmission brought back to life and let it go wheel another day.
Exactly.
Now, the next one, yes, folks, I told you this was a busy couple of weeks, was I'm sorry, Scott, I can't leave those words in there.
You're killing me, Smalls. You're killing me.
Is a good friend of ours, Dave, and Dave has a really nice old Willys wagon. You know, the early version. People call them the early Gladiator because it has that front face that looks like a gladiator's helmet, you know. And it's kind of the wagon you see in MASH, you know, as the ambulance and in a lot of different places. So it's kind of a really neat old rig. But it had been, the previous owner had done a V8 conversion and an automatic transmission, I think. No, I think it's a manual. Not that played into this. But Dave was having some run problems, and so he thought, well, okay, I'm going to replace the points. I don't get points. I don't like points. Okay, I understood that.
Yeah.
You know, but he put a Pertronics distributor in, and thinking that was, you know, this nice electronic distributor. And Dave, I'm sorry, I'm not picking on you here, but one of the things they did is when he put it in, he took away all of the ancillary points wiring, including a little white block that goes on the firewall that some of you are going, oh no. And I agree with you. He took away the ballast resistor. Now, this is a little bit of old Jeep stuff for you young guys out there. Okay. When you look at a firewall on an old Jeep, I don't care if it's got a Chevy conversion or it's a Jeep, it's whatever. If it's got points and a distributor and a coil mounted on the firewall or the side of the engine block, and there's wires going to it, and you look back to the wires, and somewhere there's this either white ceramic block with 2 terminals or 4 terminals on the end, or some little gray box that sits on the firewall with wires going in and out of it. Don't throw that away. Okay?
Yeah.
Coils in the old time were literally, and I'm not sure the exact, but let's just call them, they were 9-volt coils. They weren't 12 volt, they were 9 volt. And it may be a little more, a little less, but let's just stick with 9 for the sake of this. And the idea was, in the older cars, let's go 70s, let's go 70 and earlier, all right? Gasoline wasn't what we have today. It wasn't refined. It wasn't to the level of our octanes and ignitability. The sparks were not as hot to get this stuff, and our whole carburetor systems weren't as good to get the bloody engine running, okay, when it's a start. So when you turn your ignition key in a normal automobile that has an ignition key that has a start, run, and accessory position, when you turn it to start, you would feed 12 volts directly to that 9-volt coil. Now, in the long run, that'll overheat it. But for the short term, it basically kicks it in the butt and makes really hot spark, which means during the crank to start, you have a boosted spark. Not a bad thing. Get your engine started. As soon as you let go of that, though, the key switch springs back to the run contacts and puts power on the run wires. And that run wire goes from the key to that ballast resistor, which steps the voltage down to 9 volts and feeds the coil in parallel to the other one. But that other circuit on the start's now disconnected. And so the coil happily runs along. Well, when you take that ballast resistor off and feed the coil full-time 12 volts, depends on how well the coil's made. And I think Dave's was made pretty well because he told me it lasted about 6 months before it went and died. Puke the oil out of it, you know, it basically overheated. And
you let out the magic smoke.
You let the magic smoke out. So they put another coil in. And it ran for a while, and it started doing the same sort of misfire and this kind of stuff. And fortunately, a friend of the show, John Carl, we've talked about him. We'll talk about him again. Yep. John kind of saw that, and Dave, let's get you a ballasted resistor. That's just a coil that's got that resistor inside it. Now, you don't get the hot spark during crank, but you know, you also don't have to worry about it burning out.
Right.
And we are talking about more modern engines. And it still ran kind of wonky, not great. So he said, well, let me put a fuel injection system on. So he put a fast fuel injector throttle body on it.
Right.
And they hooked it all up. And it didn't want to spit. You know, it didn't want to pump fuel. It didn't want to behave.
Yeah.
And So they went ahead and they started playing around, and Dave then added, well, I need maybe to put an MSD ignition system on, which is a multi-spark discharge, but that manufacturer took the initials to MSD. And they started hooking everything up. And no spark, no fuel, no nothing.
I see where this is going.
So here's the thing, folks. What it was a little bit of a mystery hunt, because the only manual we had was the MSD manual, because that's the last part they bought. I didn't have the fast system. I didn't have. But you kind of look at this, and this is a little bit of a story for you about take it one step at a time. First thing to do is, was the Pertronics behaving itself? Was I getting a digital signal out of the Pertronics? Initially, I was not, because the key ignition, well, they had hooked up, the Pertronics only has 2 wires on it. It's got a red and a black.
Right.
And they go to the plus and the minus of the coil. Well, it doesn't actually power the coil. Okay? You're supposed to keep your ignition on power, from the key on the positive side. And the Pertronics is actually drawing power from the plus side.
All right.
So if you didn't have your key power to the coil and then pull the Pertronics off. Now, on the flip side, the Pertronics is switching the ground to the coil. And folks, let me say something. Points are nothing. There's no power to points. Points do not have any. All they do is they sit on that negative terminal of the coil, and they close the switch to ground, open the switch. Close the switch to ground, open the switch. So it in itself is not powered. It's just a mechanical system that's opening and closing points, which is a fancy thing for calling a set of switch contacts.
Yeah.
And if you have a V8, it does it 8 times, eight times every 2 revolutions. Okay, so you get your firing order. And the Pertronics, even though it's an electronic, mimics a points. All it's doing is switching that ground, floating, grounded, floating, grounded, floating, grounded.
Right.
So it had to be powered. So we got it powered. Then now to do the MSD, here's what got confusing, is you take all that back off the coil. And the MSD has 2 leads that power the coil, and nothing else can go on the coil. So it actually powers and grounds, doing so that it can actually, the only way I can think about it is shake the switch. Normally you would ground and you get the coil to fire. Now it's going and doing multi-spark discharge,
right,
to make your engine run a little stronger, more fuel efficient. But it has to be triggered. Now it has to be triggered by the points. Well, you don't have points. We now have faux points, electronic points. So
right.
All we had to do was trigger it via the ground lead to the Pertronics. But now I have to feed the key ignition to the MSD and to the Pertronics, but not to the coil. Nowhere is that said in a manual, but you have to figure out how these systems work, folks, and that's where we're going with it. And the end result was and if once we did that, and I put an old-fashioned timing light, inductive timing light, and I put it on the coil wire, not on any one of the things, because I wanted to see if I was getting fire now. And amazing, yeah, we got a really nice light show without getting shocked, blink, a blink, a blink, a blink. Hey, we got coil fire now.
Right.
Wonderful. Now we got to get fuel. And you go into the fast system, and it's all got sensors, and it turns out that it's a pretty neat little system that, okay, you put your battery here, okay, and we can feed that from over here where we actually fuse it to ground, and we have a ground connection here. So, and then we got to let it know that ignition is on. Oh, gee, there's another wire for the key switch to let the fast system know we're going. And then how do I trigger the fast? How do I time the fast so that it injects the fuel with the intakes of,
Right.
And it turns out it's supposed to pick up off a tack lead. Well, the MSD does have a tack lead. The funny thing is none of these colors lined up. So we made a spaghetti nest on the fender and the hood, or not the hood, but the hood brace things, up in air with little jumpers and clips, and tied it all together. And I mean, I admit, I love the fact that everybody's looking at me with a raised eyebrow going, no way this is gonna I said, well, it may, let's just, I don't know. Cause this is the first time it's going to start like that. We turned the key. It didn't do one full revolution, that thing lit up. Everybody was just like, I won't use the words they used because you would bleep it again. But there was some level of astonishment that I had mixed up all of these parts. One of the issues that they had run against is the MSD has several inputs for timing. And one of them is a magnetic inductance loop. Well, that's what the Pertronix uses. So they'd hooked it up to the magnetic inductance. However, while the Pertronix uses magnetic induction internally, that's the little coil with the little spiky star wheel that doesn't actually touch, that just spins inside that magnetic field. And every time the spiky tooth goes past there, it goes, oh, there's a point, there's a point, there's a point.
There it is, there it is, there
exactly.
it is.
But then it uses electronics to go switch it to ground, switch to ground, switch to ground, switch. You don't actually read the magnetic inductance. You read, and what it boils down to is magnetic inductions puts out a sine wave. Pretty much. Not a pure sine wave, but a zero rises up in a curve in an arc as the point, the little thing, metal moves in line, gives you a peak, and then as it goes away, it comes down smoothly. All right? That's not a set of points. Points are square waves, digital. You know, yeah, there's technically, if you get into the milliseconds, there's a ramp, but that ramp's really steep. The points are closed, you're grounded. As quick as electricity can flow, you know, and then when they open, they're, you know, you build full potential. There's very little ramp. So it's really is as close to a perfect square wave as you can get. And the MSD cannot take a sine wave on its square wave input. It would fire occasionally, which would make, you know, the fast unit go maybe once every 20, you know, or 30. So it would cough, or it might sputter. It might make a noise. It might send a spark out. It might not.
Right.
It was a key is, if you're going to mix systems, make sure you understand what each system needs and what it puts out. How is it fired? I had to do a quick test, and it's not a graceful one. Is I'm looking at the fast system. We fired it up, and I go, okay, this is supposedly the TAC trigger lead. I wonder if it triggers to power or ground. What's safer to trigger to ground? Let me just tap it on the side of the intake manifold. And as I go tap, 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 you hear, oh, it switches to ground. So a little bit of the deductive side there, but Miss Daisy, the name of that Jeep, it took us about 2 hours to figure out all the pieces, get them all lined up, and 4.5 hours to actually hardwire it so it was permanent. Yeah. To make it neat, to make it safe. It involved the battery was in the back, so we had to bring new heavy gauge power wires from the battery all the way up to power both the MSD and the fast system. The fast wasn't the big draw, but I will tell you that MSD sucks down some power. You know, you think about the fact that I'm not sparking once per compression stroke, but maybe 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times. So
yeah, you need some juice behind it.
You need some juice behind that. So we did get Dave back up and running again. It was, for me, it was a lot of fun. Figuring out these different systems, you know, some I've worked with. I've worked with the MSD system in the past. I'd never worked with a FAST fuel injection, but it seems like a really neat system. It worked really well, and it's a really simple trigger that, you know, and the TAC feed could have just been as simple as hooking it up to the negative terminal of the coil on the Pertronix. But again, he's already got all that kind of stuff on there. So that was Miss Daisy. And then the latest one was the one we left you guys with a teaser on the last show. Yeah. And that was our friend John Carl again. And John and I got together again. I did work out with him. And actually, I got to give a shout out to Specialty Drive Shafts in Brandon, Florida. Yeah. No, you would stop to look at the electronics. And so sorry about that. Just check Shane and the crew at Specialty Drive Shaft, you know, they can work on antique Jeep drive shafts. And I will tell you right here and now, I wish I had, you know, we'll have to post his contact info.
Yeah, that's easy. I can do that.
Okay, he'll do that. If you have a CJ3A, a CJ2, you know, one of the rare ones, a CJ4, 5s, you know, the pencil shafts that everybody says, oh, you can't get those, you can't fix those, you can't. Guess what? Shane fixed both original drive shafts for the CJ3A for John, including the slip joints, which get kind of wobbled out. He was able to put new ends on them and get them the right length, balance them. And even though, folks, when they call these pencil shafts, they're one shaft's like only about 1.25 inches in diameter to the front drive shaft, the entire length, not just the slip area. And he did a gorgeous job on it, and the rear as well. Got them as tight, probably tighter than when they came off the factory floor. So again, if you're getting the runaround, I don't care where you are, he does accept by, you can ship your shafts to him, you can call them, but they can handle just about any of them. So a real big shout out there, because he helped get this CJ3A back on the road again. So back to the teaser. What I left you with last time was the alternator wasn't charging. Okay. Still. Probably my third attempt. And what we discovered is and I think I talked a little bit about it last time, was they're pretty simple. This is a GM alternator mounted to the little Go Devil 60 horsepower flathead. Normally is a pretty easy hookup. 3 wires. One of them is the big fat one that goes to the battery, and the other 2 are called the pin 1 and pin 2. Pin 1 is called the excitation. No nasty thoughts there, folks. It's just the electrical kick in the fanny to get the alternator started generating. Mm-hmm. And the other one is the sense wire. In other words, I'm going to go out and look at the voltage in the system and see, do I need to start charging more? All right. Now, a lot of people, including John, had just taken that sense wire right up to the stud. That's all it did, just loop back to the battery stud on the back of the alternator. And that's okay if you have a very simple system and you don't have big current drops, around the network, because hopefully it's the same voltage as the battery. But you do put yourself in a little bit of trouble with that, or you can, is that if you don't have a very balanced system where the voltage is consistent across the system, you won't know that you need more voltage because you're pulling it right on the back of the alternator. It's going, I'm putting out 13.9. I don't need to put out any more. It's fine. And meanwhile, your stereo's starving because it's down 25 feet of too small a wire. Right. But that's one of those easy ones to fix. You just move where that thing senses. And here's the key. You got to use a heavy gauge on that sense wire. Not because you're pulling a lot of current, but you don't want resistance. You want it to read pretty accurately. But in John's case, the back of the alternator was fine. I mean, he's got like 4 fuses in the whole Jeep, guys. And his
that
big
includes
stereo,
the one for the radio.
Yeah, well, the big stereo has its own, and it draws directly off the battery, and the battery's close enough. I mean, literally, I think 10 inches away.
Yeah, if that.
So it reads pretty well. No, folks, what we came to the realization was that every wiring diagram out there on that 3-wire tells you to take the excitation line, come off the key, from, in his case, the run position. He doesn't have a start position. He's got a foot starter, where he presses the block down, a pedal. Take it through an indicator light, a 12-volt indicator light, and run it to terminal 1 on the alternator. And what happens there is that light is your I'm not charging light. And what happens is when you start the Jeep or you turn the key on, current will flow from the key through the light to the field. Right. Internal to the alternator, once it starts generating its own power, it will feed backwards against terminal 1 and keep its own field alive.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, it jumpstarts the system.
It jumpstarts. And so what happens is the other side of that wire now is 12 volts from the alternator. Well, if you have 12 on both sides, we talked about this on the TJ side marker lights. If you have 12 volts on both sides, it's the same as having no volts on both sides, and the light goes out. Right. And if your alternator quits charging, then all of the excitation power comes from the key again, and the light comes on, and your alternator's not working. Right. Well, you want an interesting challenge, folks? Try and find a 12-volt incandescent panel light. Now, I'm not saying you can't.
Yeah, there's tons of them in the Smithsonian.
Yeah, that's about it. We found, I think, 4. Okay? Yeah. From places like Granger, I can't remember the other one, but some of the other industrial supply houses, even they don't carry a lot, but they realize there's some panel-mounted equipment in. And I called Granger to ask. He goes, "Oh, you want an alternator charge light?" All right. And John had used a completely different light, which 99% of you probably would have too. And there's a huge number of them out there, and it's a LED.
Yeah.
Well, folks, an LED internal. Well, first off, LEDs, if you've got any bit of electronic bent and you've ever played with this stuff, you're going to know that most LEDs function in around the 2-volt range. They have a pretty significant resistor inside that little housing to drop 12 volts down to 2 volts. So you don't burn out your resistor. Some of them are even lower than 2 volts. Some of them excitation's only about 1.7. And that's to get into the LED. And then some of that gets chewed up and spit out as light.
Right.
So what comes out is usually less than 1 volt, which, isn't enough to kickstart the alternator. Now, what I think is really fun about this is you could wire it directly and not have a light, but then you'd never know if you're charging or not charging. Yes, tell me I can put a ammeter on it. He has one, but he doesn't really want it wired in there because ammeters draw 100% of your current from the battery that goes to the rest of the Jeep.
Right.
And there's a lot of voltage in there that can let out a lot of magic smoke and start fires. Voltmeters, well, they can be somewhat instructional. You start looking, oh, wait a minute, I'm at 11 volts. Well, you've had to be offline for a while to know.
Yeah.
The alternator light's a great thing. It's just, where do I find an incandescent bulb? Because incandescent bulbs are neat. From an electronic point of view, they're what they're called a thermally variable resistor.
Right.
When they're cold, they pass a lot of current. As they heat up, they get tighter and tighter and tighter, and they get brighter and brighter and brighter, and that's how they work.
More and more resistance.
More and more resistance, but that works really well where you want a bright light, when you first start to say, okay, we're starting, and then when the voltages match, it goes out. So it's not that big a deal. Well, we found one place there was an incandescent bulb, and he had an old license plate light. You can still buy those, and they have the little peanut bulb in. You quoted the part number.
The 194, 120, or 168, or
Right.
192.
And they take the incandescent peanut bulb.
Yes.
Which you can still get.
Yes.
And I said, let's do an experiment. Right there on the fender. I said, you had another LED? He said, yeah. I said, I want to do this on the fender and see if it works. And so we put the LED, which he was going to have in the dash, and the incandescent bulb, which we'll talk about in a minute, and we put them together, their pluses together and their minuses together, and then I put a lead to the battery, with just a jumper clip like a key, and
You're making a test rig.
The other one down to terminal 1. And without the engine running, I locked it on, and both lights came on. Oh, that's pretty cool. I didn't know if it'd leave enough current from the one to the other till they both came on. And we started the Jeep, started fine, and both lights went out as soon as the alternator, and I'm looking with a VOM at the thing, and it came up to, it wouldn't quite get to 14 volts unless you really rev the engine, but that's the pulley size on the alternator, which can be adjusted, but it would hold 13.6, 13.8 without a problem, and that will charge a battery, and that's part of that sense thing I was talking about too. So it's like, and he's like, I can deal with it. I'm going to put that bulb and I'm going to shove it up under the dash.
Right.
I'll tie it to something, zip tie. He says, but I got to be able to drive my Jeep. It ends up that when he did zip tie it up under the dash, when you turn the key on, his doesn't have a start key. It's just an on and an off. And when you turn it on, you crank with a foot push, and it is a CJ3A, which was sold overseas as well as local. So the foot pedal that has a rod that goes to a little bell crank on the end of the starter, and the starter has a push button on it that you have to push in to activate the solenoid and crank, is in the middle of the Jeep. So is this pedal. And the light shung down like it was a foot light to show you where to stomp on the starter pedal. He's like, yeah, I think we're going to leave this way.
Hey, it's funny how life has those little happy little accidents,
Well, yeah, and so now we have a really effective way to both see where the starter pedal is, as well as kickstart the alternator.
Yeah.
The other thing we did learn, interestingly enough, is that whole 1-barrel carburetor doesn't have a fast idle cam on it.
Yeah.
So you start it up and it goes immediately to boom, 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 which is not a fast enough speed for the alternator to self-excite. Now, once you get it self-excited, it's okay. So what you have to do is it's sitting there going boom, boom, boom. Rev it once, boom, and the light goes out, and it doesn't come back on because you've established your field, your armature current.
Right.
And now it's generating enough to keep itself alive, but you got to give it that one little, swift, kick in the tush to get it fired off. So there's a little trick for any of you doing the, older vehicles and converting over to an alternator and using the GM 3-wire format, which is probably the most common one out there, is using the light that is shown on all the hundreds of wiring diagrams you can find on Dr. Google. It can't be an LED. Now, your other option that would work is we did put about a 50 ohm resistor in parallel with that LED, and that worked fine. That put enough current into the LED, but also let more than enough go through to kickstart the alternator. The downside is if you leave the key on without actually cranking for an excessive amount of time,
you'll burn things out.
It gets really hot. In fact, John burned his hand, fingers. I thought it wasn't getting that hot. It isn't when it's running. The alternator's running. It's zero currents flowing through there because you got 12 volts from both ends. Now we were doing the test with a 1/4 watt, and it didn't burn up immediately. And I expect if you got one of those LED resistors you get with the LED conversion for taillights so that your blinker still works, you know what I'm talking about? Mm-hmm. Those things are like, I think they're 50 watt, not 1/4 watt, they're huge, but you're still going to generate that heat and draw your battery down if you turn the key on and just leave it on.
Right.
So his light bulb one's a little better. You leave the key on, it's not going to burn anything up. It's like leaving your dome light on. It will take the battery down, but it's a little safer. And why not get something out of that power?
Yeah.
Like being able to see where the pedal is.
Yeah, now you got under the dash rock lights.
Yeah. So,
Booyah.
So anyway, folks, I know we probably run a little bit long with this story, but...
Yeah, I might cut this into a part 1, part 2, because it's an hour and a half.
Wow.
Yeah.
So sorry about that, but I keep getting emails from folks about, tell me more tech. Well, apparently the rest of the people around here heard you and started saying, you need tech. So here, you come fix this company here. No, in all honesty, I love helping folks with it. We got a new project coming up for Scott since we're already running a little bit long here.
Yeah, we're working on we got the amp research steps, Power Step XL. Thanks, Mark, at the Jeep Lab for that. And but we're gonna work on a way to make them usable with the doors off.
With the doors off or with tube doors or with any options like that, because right now they're tied into the factory, well, not factory, I guess, amps wiring system has you trigger them off your door lights. Right. And that's great if you have doors on. You take the doors off, the
steps don't come down now.
Yeah, either they come down and stay, or they don't come down at all.
They don't come down at all.
Okay, well, because you disable the lights when you unplug the harness. And that's not acceptable to your side of the financial department.
She wants to be able to use the doors like you can on your rock slides.
So we're going to and the problem is these are not as simple wiring harness as the steps that I have. Mine are quite a few years older, use a little bit simpler technology. These steps he's got they're smart steps. Yeah, they look at the whole Jeep system, and there's the main module, and then there's the sub module that looks at the light circuits and all that stuff. And so we're going to carefully kind of go through the wiring on this, and we've already done some preliminary stuff to say, okay, is this reading 12 volts being switched to ground, like the old style, or is it reading digital off of nothing to, we don't know what it's reading. So we're actually going to install them per the factory, and then I'm going to pop some test equipment on those leads and go, what you looking at? And then we're going to recreate that same signal with some magnetic reed switches. And probably some either, rockers or push on, push off locking switches, so that once the magnetics there's no doors, it's the same thing as a door being open. So we got to be able to make sure the steps go closed. Or as you say, when you unplug the doors, then it goes, okay, there's no dome light. And you could go in theoretically and hit your dome light switch to bring all the steps down at one time and go back up again. Scott just got this. Oh, my.
You know what? All joking aside, that may be the answer.
Yeah, but that's inelegant in my book. But we will see.
But it'll work.
And here's the whole thing we're going to play with. That signal may not be coming to the door when you hit the switch that way. So we're going to be looking at how does the amp step trigger? What is the trigger? How do we recreate that trigger without using the Jeep's wiring so that it can be an independent? So that's going to be a fun little project to work it out. And, of course, there's this whole thing about, well, I can't damage the XL circuit control system. So I've got to do it very gently and do it non-invasive inspections on what it's triggering on and how. I don't want to go, okay, I got it all figured out. Oh, by the way, you need a new door closing module for the Jeep and a new control module for the Power Step XL. So there's going to be more tech to come here, folks. And you know what? One of these days, we'll actually get out and drive these Jeeps. Now that I can put gas in mine.
Yes,
Yay!
that was important.
Well, folks, this has been a long show. Probably the end of part 2.
Yes.
We'll have to decide. You'll have to let me know where you split it so I can make the video match.
Yeah, I'll probably do it at the when we go to break.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, you can confirm that in the next day or so. So, folks, we hope you found this interesting. It's a little bit of a different, me running around kind of helping fellow Jeepers. That's kind of the fun thing to do.
And we do have to remember that coming up here really soon is Crawling for the Fallen.
Crawling for the Fallen.
And Jeeping with Judd registration is open.
Yep. Limited. Very limited.
Very limited.
They will have some, and I got to put that in quotes because it's not defined yet, but there will be some cash at the gate kind of things. It is a little more this year because he still needs to raise the funds, but there's only I think 1,600 or 1,500 pre-registrations, and then there'll be some at the gate, but they're trying to keep the crowd down from the COVID, obviously, and it's a sad fact of life right now. So if you got the time, get online right now to Jeeping with Judd. Believe me, you start to type that in, Google will definitely find it.
Able to finish it.
And get on that pre-registration site and get your sites right now. I saw within the first day almost every one of the optional buy-ups for the specialty VIP parking, the access, and all that stuff.
Mostly gone.
The Fast Pass, this is their new thing they introduced this year for all the rides so that you didn't have to sit at the back of the queue to get on one of the trails. You could go up with a Fast Pass and go to the front. They're gone. Everything, but you can still get to the event, and it's still for an absolutely wonderful cause. Sheriff Grady Judd and his crew, the whole, that's they do such a wonderful job there at Clear Springs Ranch in Bartow, Florida. So hopefully you guys will get out there.
And like I said, also too, because Crawling for the Fallen is coming up in November, so check out Off-Road United for they have all the details on all their pages. One other email that came through too that I wanted to make sure I touched base on. A listener is listening to us on the iTunes podcast app, and for some reason it only starts on show 47. Okay, it only for some reason only does or 27. We can only do 100 shows, and unfortunately it's nothing we do. It's Apple iTunes. But if you go to the Spotify, if you go, we're on Amazon.
Just go to our website if you want to.
Right,
but you can get every broadcast there.
Exactly. But like I said, Amazon, Spotify, all the other players have all the episodes.
Yeah.
And again, if you can't find it, onthetrailpodcast.com, go to the archives. You can hear from episode 1 when we were just starting out and
where we were trying to not screw up.
Yes. Exactly. So everything's a lot more free for them now. So again, to that listener, you can check out those the older shows that way. And again, if you have any questions, just give us an email at onthetrailpodcast@gmail.com. But Kevin, I think we have done enough talking.
I really do. And now that I'm not even going to lock hubs. I just need to get the Jeep to the gas station.
Yeah, you're going to put gas in it.
So, we're going to get that thing down to the petrol station, and pip and fill her up so that she's ready to go.
And thank you for joining us on Land Rover Cast. And, wait, Sinister always got that. Sinister already has that.
Yeah. So anyway, folks, we've had a lot of fun. You've let me go off on a technical dive deeper than I think I've gone in a year or two.
Hey, it's okay. That's what they want.
I've had a blast doing it. I'm happy as can be to help folks out when I can. There's only so much of me, but still it's a lot of fun to go out there. And some of these challenges have been kind of interesting. I've never had to build an AX-15 out of the wreckage of 2, and then actually dry shifted all the way through all 5 gears. That was a novel concept. And then same sort of thing, going, okay, you want to use a Pertronix with an MSD and a fast in 350 Chevy crate motor shoved into a 50-something Jeep Wagoneer or whatever.
I think it's 63, Miss Daisy.
63. Yeah. Sure, why not? Let's see what we can do.
Yay!
Yeah. And then of course my favorite at the moment. I gotta just say, working with John Carl is just so much fun in that Jeep, folks. He is. His license got the latest picture.
Yeah, I was going to say he finally got his newest upgrade.
He got a Mach 50 cal, a.k.a. Rat Patrol. And if you don't know what that is, Google it. It was a pretty awesome TV show. Yeah. And you'll see a bunch of these Willies in the Sahara Desert, supposedly.
Rommel.
Hassel and Rommel. And but please don't try to ride it, jumping a dune, standing in the back, hanging onto a 50 cal. But I told...
That's how you break your nose and end up like Nika McBrain from Iron Maiden.
But I told John, I said, okay, you've just given a whole new definition to open carry.
And on that note,
we got to run, folks. Again, as we always say,
wheel legal,
tread lightly,
take nothing but pictures. Take nothing but pictures, memories, and your trash when you leave the trail.
We want to have them there for our grandkids as well.
Absolutely. And I almost got it. I almost did it.
We'll try sleep next time.
Oh, man, and my lips failed me. So on that note,
we will talk to you guys later. I hope you have a good one, and look forward to Halloween. Trick or treat safe if you're trick or treating. If not, just buy a bag of M&Ms and pour them in a bowl.
I'm going as a parts guy. All right. On that note, bye.
Bye now.
Proceeding has been provided for entertainment only. Proper service and repair procedures are vital to the safe, reliable operation of all motor vehicles, as well as personal safety of those performing those repairs. Standard safety procedures and precaution, including the use of safety goggles and proper tools and equipment, should be followed at all times to eliminate the possibility of personal injury or improper service which could damage the vehicle or compromise its safety.
What he said. Thanks a lot for listening, guys. You guys have a great day.
Bye.
This has been a Bent Axle Media production.